forge global agreement here in Glasgow, responding to adaptation needs, which is vital. Today, ministers are starting their work on the negotiations. Together, we face the arduous task of building political consensus between almost 200 countries. Finding consensus is not going to be straightforward, but the progress made last week demonstrates that a constructive spirit amongst negotiators exists, and here in Glasgow, we have a unique opportunity to reach a historic outcome, and I'm committed to bringing countries together. We want to forge agreement that means we see more action this decade to help keep the limit of 1.5 degrees global temperature rise in reach. Now, during the informal stock-taking plenary, which was held this morning, I outlined how we will work during this week. I also announced ministerial pairings on key topics. These include adaptation, loss and damage, finance, keeping 1.5 alive, and of course the key rulebook issues of common timeframes, Article 6 on carbon markets, and transparency. My priority now is pace. There needs to be a sense of urgency in all our negotiations. The science is clear, we have no time to lose, and I will ensure that negotiations proceed in a timely manner, whilst of course ensuring transparency and inclusivity. Last week, countries made commitments which will all help to protect our planet, but they must be delivered on and accounted for. Today, on Adaptation and Loss and Damage Day, the spotlight will be on those nations and communities which are most vulnerable to climate change, those whose voices are too often left unheard. And we know that even if we stopped polluting our world tomorrow, there will be negative consequences for many millions. And that is why issues such as adaptation are so important. Now, I'm pleased to see progress on these topics today, and particularly welcome the commitments to the Adaptation Fund, which will be made in the next few hours, including from the UK, to support vulnerable communities to respond to climate change. Developed countries and development banks recognize they need to increase levels of finance for adaptation, and I hope we will be able to capture this renewed commitment in the COP26 negotiated outcome. Those of you who have followed this process will know that loss and damage has historically been seen as a polarizing issue. But I'm encouraged that the mood music has changed somewhat, and there is now a practical recognition that action is needed on this topic in the face of growing impacts. The conclusion of discussions within the subsidiary bodies on the Santiago network is a testament to that, and paves the way for greater resources to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage. Climate vulnerable communities are particularly at the forefront of my mind and will be so throughout these negotiations. They, and the generations to come, will not forgive us if we fail to deliver in Glasgow. I'd now like to pass to the UNFCCC Executive Secretary Patricia Espinosa for her remarks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, and thanks to all of you for being here, joining this Presidency's press conference. I want to just maybe building on the very comprehensive summary that the President has just presented, underline that the arrangements that he has put in place for this week and the involvement of ministers, in my view, are a very, very positive development. They have, many of them have already arrived. I would say most of them have already arrived, and they are all eager and willing to get involved in the negotiations. And actually, the decisions that need to be taken now are more of political level decisions. So that is really a very, very welcomed development, and the way that the President has arranged the organization of work for week 2, I think should allow us to be successful, to be able to adopt a meaningful group of decisions at the end of this week. I am cautiously optimistic, I would say, about it. Yes, because the issues under discussion are not easy, but what I can see now is that the will and the political level participation is there. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Yes, the acronym is always a challenge. UNFCCC stands for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. For the reporting, it may be easier to use UN climate change. Thank you. Is there any statement to come, or shall we proceed for Q&As?
No, I think we're happy to take questions.
Okay, please. Let's start in the first row.
Hi, Leslie Hook from the Financial Times. A question for Alec. What would you like to see in the cover text? What's the sort of ideal contents of that document? Thank you.
So, Leslie, thank you for that. We have put out a non-paper, as you are aware, detailing the issues that have been raised by parties over the last week. Obviously, we're going to have a discussion around that. Archie Young, my chief negotiator, has been leading on that work, and there will be a heads of delegation meeting later on this afternoon to discuss those issues. So maybe, Archie, if you wanted to comment.
Thank you very much. As the COP president says, we've been engaging widely with parties and with groups, both bilaterally, and also we have held multilateral consultations in order to hear from all what their expectations are, what they would like to see. As a result, we put out the non-paper over the weekend. We have already heard some feedback, and we continue to welcome that. We will be having a meeting this afternoon with all heads of delegation in order to continue to hear the feedback, and on the basis of that, we will then set out next steps. 2 points I would raise on it. One is that we have been clear through the various reflections notes from the COP president, from the ministerial meetings that we have held, our expectations that this conference will deliver in terms of the science and in terms of the expectations of all of our citizens. And the second is to highlight the inclusive approach that we're taking by really co-creating this with all parties and with groups, so that this is not simply a text which is kind of arrives from the presidency, but one which is really developed constructively and collaboratively with all parties and groups. Thank you.
We continue in the first row, please.
Thank you. My name is Justin Catanoso. I'm with Mongabay. This issue is to transparency and accountability. In the United Kingdom and the European Union, the biggest source of renewable energy is burning forest biomass instead of coal. So I'll set aside for a moment the question of whether this is driving deforestation in places like the United States and Canada, which are producing these wood pellets. My question is, are you concerned that the emissions from millions of tons of burning wood are not counted at the smokestack in the European Union, in the UK, and that this is, in effect, affecting the accuracy of the carbon accounting in those countries and the transparency as well? And this comes in light of today's investigative story in the Washington Post about many, many countries underreporting their emissions and a lack of transparency and accuracy. This gets to the heart of what you're trying to accomplish here. Thank you.
Well, I mean, obviously, as I've said, one of the things that we are very keen to close off are all the outstanding elements. The rule is a key standing element, and that is something that we have been discussing for some years now. Transparency absolutely underpins the Paris Agreement, and obviously we need to be able to see that the commitments that are being made are actually being delivered on. And there's an enormous amount of work that has been done so far by our officials and negotiators on this issue. But of course, what we need to see is that we close off transparency at this COP. Do you want to say that? Would you like to come in? No. Sorry, the use of well, look, I mean, I think what we're going to, as I said, I think the key issue here is to ensure that we get agreement on the transparency tables that are going to form the basis of what is reported. There are a range of emissions that will be part of those transparency tables, and as I said, what we want to do is to reach consensus on that.
The gentleman in row 3. Sorry, 4.
Hello, Felix von Geyer with neworator.com. Now, I think anyone who's been on the COPs before would realize that, as you were saying, they've been very politically polarized, for example, in Madrid. While some of the politics haven't quite gone away, I think many of the issues are probably now more technical in things like corresponding adjustments, carryovers, and loss and damage. Is there anything you would like to say about these technical issues, particularly on, say, corresponding adjustments and loss and damage, which would be instructive to journalists understanding where we are with current negotiations? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I think, as you'll have heard from the SB chairs this morning, there are a range of issues that were closed off by them, and I really welcome the work that they and their teams have put in. Clearly, some of those elements that are coming forward are technical, but there are also elements which are political as well. And I think closing off on Article 6 on transparency and common timeframes will require a political consensus to be built amongst ministers. And it's why I outlined for you the 7 areas as well. And in the plenary I set out which pairings of ministers will lead work on this. I'll invite Archie Young if he wants to say anything from a technical perspective on what's gone on in the last week.
Thank you very much.